These are ravens. This is a golf ball. Inside this is a GPS tracker. And this is the story of the disappearing golf balls and the search to find them. This is me and this is my brother, and this story starts when we decided to take up golfing. Living in the middle of the Nevada desert, we didn't exactly have a ton of options, so we bought a bunch of golf balls and just started hitting them out into the middle of the desert. This was a great plan, except some days we would go out to pick up all the golf balls and they would be gone. Not just like some of the golf balls, like all of the golf balls. This happened over and over the course of several years, to the point where there were hundreds of golf balls that had been taken. At first I blamed my son and his friends because I told him about our secret driving range, and later the golf balls were gone. Eventually I had an opportunity to try out a more secluded desert driving range, but even then the golf balls would continue to disappear. It now seemed unlikely that my son and his friends were stealing these golf balls, and so in an effort to find the real thief, I went on Amazon and bought a hidden game cam. Once the game camera arrived, we set it up, placed a bunch of golf balls out there, and just waited. Other than a few impersonators, it didn't take long to figure out what was going on. First, there were some picture clues, then some video clues, and then eventually we got some actual video footage of the culprit caught red-handed. This short video clip was a huge turning point in this adventure, because while I had suspected it for a while, this proved birds were stealing these golf balls. This was the craziest thing. This blew my mind. At first I was calling these crows, but after some research, it was very clear I was dealing with ravens, one of the smartest animals in the world and notorious for stealing shiny objects. And while my background is in civil engineering and 3D visualization, and I'm no bird watcher, I couldn't help but just try and get more and more footage of these ravens taking these golf balls. I tested different locations, times of day, different types of golf balls and colors. I even tested things like Easter eggs and plastic balls. And eventually the ravens and I, we had a good thing going. I would go early in the morning, I would set out a bunch of golf balls or other objects, wait a while, and they would come get them, and then I would collect the footage. Watching these video clips, I would suspect that you're starting to have the same question that I had. The same question that drove me almost to an obsession for the better part of 6 months. My thoughts on this matter led me to 3 potential scenarios. Scenario 1, individual and random. They were just scattered wherever the ravens picked up the balls and dropped them. Scenario number 2, isolated clusters. These could be nests or different caches of a group of golf balls, but there were a bunch of these different caches scattered around. Or scenario 3, the mother lode. This is where they were taking every single golf ball to the same location. You can imagine which one I was most excited about. And in my mind, I was thinking, man, wouldn't it be so cool if there was just a pool, a sea of these golf balls somewhere. And in this area, we have a ton of desert caves. And so in my mind, I was envisioning a cave overflowing with golf balls. So now I had a culprit and I had some hypotheses. I just needed a plan. The first idea was perhaps the easiest, and that was just to try and search and find the mother lode ourselves. So my brother and I and our kids, we spent hours searching through all of these desert caves. We looked in the trees, we tried to find nests, and we didn't find a single golf ball in the hours that we spent searching and hiking. The next idea was just to watch and observe. And I did try to just sit on the hill and watch them, try and see where they were going, but this was very difficult to time. So more successful was to set up cameras and try and find the direction they were taking them. And while this worked somewhat, it kind of just showed that it wasn't consistent. Sometimes they would go north, more often, but then sometimes they would go south. The final and most ambitious idea was just to try and get them to take a GPS tracker. And it kind of makes sense. If they would take a golf ball, why couldn't they pick up a GPS tracker and take it to the same location and help us find the mother lode, or at least help us figure out where all these golf balls were going? I didn't know much about GPS trackers, but I did know that my daughter's watch had GPS capabilities. So with a little arts and crafts, I had Beak Bait version 1.0. At first, they weren't taking the bait, but eventually we went out of town for a day and came back and it was gone, but the battery had died. I wasn't about to give up now, and so this led me down a rabbit hole of researching and trying to find the best and smallest tracking device that I could, and this led me to order 2 of these tracky devices. I then did a lot of testing and iteration to try and find the best design that hopefully these ravens would take, and we finally settled on what was essentially 2 halves of Easter egg shells, duct tape with white duct tape down the middle. Actually getting the ravens to take these trackers proved to be very challenging. I would put out the tracker surrounded with golf balls that I knew they would take, and they just weren't having it. Eventually, I smartened up and started making tracking decoys, which looked and felt the exact same as the tracker. They just didn't have the tracker inside. And we were very careful to fill these with rocks to make sure that they weighed not only the same as the tracker, but also the same as the golf balls. This is when things turned really frustrating because I kid you not, I would put 9 tracking decoys and 1 tracker with the GPS in it, and they would take all 9 tracking decoys and leave the GPS. This seems so improbable that the ravens could actually know what was inside these trackers that it started to make me really think outside the box, just rethink what I was doing. This gave me a crazy hypothesis, and it didn't take much research to give some validation to my idea, which was essentially that the electromagnetic radiation of this GPS signal, which is basically a cell phone, was messing with the birds. And I found a lot of research that this actually happens. And it kind of makes sense because if I thought back how things had gone, the only times the birds were ever taking the trackers were when the battery died, or if it was a decoy, which was the same weight and size, but it just didn't have anything inside of it. And while a tracker like this will look and feel harmless to us, to a bird, it's like a hot potato. It'd be like us trying to pick up a hot coal. We would drop it as quickly as we picked it up. As soon as I made this discovery, I quickly changed the settings on the tracker so that rather than update every couple minutes, it would only update every couple hours, thus reducing the risk of sending out electromagnetic radiation. As soon as I did this, within just a few hours, I had my first hit. For the first time in months, the ravens had actually taken the tracker. The raven flew almost a mile before dropping it in the front yard of one of our friends' houses. Dal, tell me what we just did.
Okay, so covered the tracker, because the ravens took it and it dropped at Derek from Esther's house.
Right over here.
Yeah. Right here. Yes.
With this breakthrough, things started getting a lot more interesting. We could finally get these ravens to take the trackers. So we would set out the trackers, wait for them to take them somewhere, and then we would go search and try and find where they landed, and still hoping for this mother lode, this cave overflowing with golf balls. We scaled up the operation and really went all in on trying to get enough data to figure out which of those 3 scenarios was actually happening with these golf balls. But while this was really cool to start getting better footage and better data, the reality of the situation just started to sink in. They would rarely take the GPS trackers, and when they did, they wouldn't take them very far. I mean, you can just see from this footage, back to the hot coal analogy, they treat these GPS trackers different from the golf balls. And I could never figure out if it was because they were still emitting some sort of signal, or if they'd just been trained that these were different than the decoys or the golf balls. And while the metaphorical pot at the end of the rainbow had been driving me forward in this adventure the entire time, the reality was these trackers seem to be dropped randomly by themselves. Sometimes they end up in a pile of rocks or a bush. The data was seeming to point to scenario number 1. While I had been hoping for something more like this, where they'd be picking them up from different locations and taking them all to the same final destination, the data seemed to point more toward something like this. And this was the actual tracker screenshot showing how they wouldn't just drop them, but they would pick them up and drop them again. And so I would watch and I would wait, and they would pick them up again if I didn't go out and find them. I also received a text message and this picture from a friend who knew I was working on this project, who had found some golf balls in a field adjacent to our property, putting another nail in the coffin of the overflowing cave scenario. But while it seems unlikely that we will ever find that cave, it still seems unlikely that they're also completely random as well. I mean, what if we could somehow have a tracker that was the same consistency and feel as a golf ball? I wonder if they would treat them differently and take them more to where the golf balls are going. And maybe we would find, maybe not scenario 3, but maybe something like scenario 2, where there would be caches of these golf balls somewhere. We've since moved away, and I'm not actively working on this project anymore, but I'm really curious to know how many other people are interested to learn more and see if we could possibly find this. And I also feel like with a certain level of interest, I could work on making some of these trackers, starting out with 3D printed prototypes first, and then maybe someday manufacturing them so other people can find their golf balls as well. If you are interested, make sure to subscribe to this channel, but also visit beakbait.com, where you can sign up to receive updates, and you can also have a link to see more of the footage that wasn't included as part of this video. If enough of you show interest, who knows, maybe I will be able to revisit this project and someday make that even better part 2.